Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Minds at Work community. My name is Lauren. I'm the community manager here. And today, in the spirit of Talk Money Week, we are talking about another somewhat taboo subject, but one you might not necessarily think of in terms of mental health at work. That's right. We're talking about money and the impact financial woes can have on the individual across all aspects of their lives. Research shows that people with poor financial well-being or financial worries are 4.1 times more likely to suffer from anxiety and nearly 5 times more likely to be going through depression. In fact, a recent survey by Close Brothers confirmed that 94% of UK employees suffer from money worries. 77% say that money worries impact them at work, and 40% worry about their finances always or often. But while there is a growing focus on mental health in the workplace, financial well-being isn't high up on the corporate agenda, even now with rising household bills and inflation as we tackle a major cost of living crisis in the UK. And one person who intimately knows the impact money troubles can have on you is today's guest. Peter Komolafe was once homeless, and years later, he took his seat at the boardroom table in Canary Wharf as a successful finance executive for a Fortune 100 company. Today, you'll see him on various TV shows as he guides audiences through the tough financial times we have ahead. Peter believes that money doesn't have to be complex, confusing, and through his YouTube and podcast series, Conversation of Money, he offers financial literacy education and training services that make money easy to understand and use. Welcome, Peter. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this, to be fair, because this has been on LinkedIn and all of the social channels for like weeks now. And I enjoy getting into having these kind of conversations where I can share a little bit of knowledge and try and make all of this a little bit more relevant. And I think that's even more the case with cost of living crisis and everything that's going on currently with the economy and around the world.
Indeed. And I should say, from my point of view, I'm sorry for my croaky voice. I have had COVID. I am just coming back into the workplace. So if I cough, I'm very, very sorry. I'll try and make sure I'm on mute for that. But here's how today will work. I'm going to have a chat with Peter at first, ask him for ideas around the topic, his thoughts, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. We'll make sure we leave plenty of time for you to ask your questions as well. But we do have the Zoom chat box as we go. So please, if you want to share anything around something that you hear or ask a question before you forget it, please do use the chat box. If you're asking a question, please put the word question or at least a Q at the beginning, just so that I can tell it's a question and I can make sure that we ask that for you. At the end of the session, we're also going to show you how to continue this conversation within our community. And if you want to live tweet or share social posts on this, please do tag us on Twitter. We're at Minds at Work, the Minds at Work, and on LinkedIn, of course, Minds at Work. But let us get started. Peter, this is a topic you know super well from both sides. So it makes sense for us to start with your story. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you came to be here?
All right. So obviously, for what I do now, professionally, I'm a qualified financial advisor, qualified mortgage advisor. But my journey into being qualified as a financial advisor, mortgage advisor, isn't the traditional route. Actually, I don't think there is a traditional route to that. But my journey to it was by utter mistake. It was being on benefits, being told I had to go for an interview, and if I didn't go for that interview, I was going to be taken off job seekers allowance. And so I rocked up to this interview in a building society and tried to sabotage it as much as possible because I was in debt at the time. And the last thing I wanted to do was rock up to a bank, to a building site and be like, hey, can I have a job? Only for them to be like, hang on a second, you owe one of our companies that we're associated with money. So I tried to sabotage the interview as much as possible. I went in jeans and a leather jacket and trainers. And I don't know what the woman who interviewed me was thinking, but she was like, oh my God, like, my customers are going to love you. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to do all your credit scores and all that kind of stuff. And you realize I owe banks a lot of money and I'm no good with money myself. And you'll send me on my merry way. At least that's what I was expecting. But lo and behold, I actually got a job. So I started as a cashier. This is about 16 years ago now this year. And I worked my way up all the way through that. But if I go back further than that, My parents are Nigerian. My last name is Nigerian. I'm from the Yoruba tribe in Nigeria. My parents came over in the 70s. They came over in 75, roughly. They had me in 79. And I have three older brothers. So I'm the last of four boys. I still say that I was a surprise to addition to the family, because my name's Peter, but our second born is also named Peter. So it's like, how can you forget? But back in the 70s, it was actually quite common when Nigerian families came over, or parents came over, that they were working, studying at the same time. And oftentimes, because they were studying and working, whenever they had kids or they brought children over, they would go into foster care. So I was fostered from 3 months all the way up to 8 years old. And then in 1988, my parents had gone back to Nigeria, I think 3 years beforehand, in 85. They was like, he's not met any of his family over in Nigeria. So what we're going to do is we're just going to get him over under the guise of a 2-week holiday. So I jumped on the plane at 8 years old. Well, they put me on a plane at 8 years old to Nigeria, landed in Lagos, people just holding up my name. And the 2-week holiday ended up being 10 years. And I got sent back to the UK in 1998 in October with 50 quid in my pocket and told to go and find my foster parents' house, who I hadn't spoken to for 10 years. I was excited, naturally, being naive and stupid. Didn't dawn on me the reality of, hang on a second, if they don't live at the address, what am I going to do? I've only got 50 quid. Luckily, they did. Stay with them for maybe like 2-3 months. And I was out on my own, sort of working very, very early on. I've been homeless as a result of that. And I found myself fortunate to be on the career path that I have taken, because that being the backdrop has given me a lot of appreciation for the things that I learned in my career that brings me to what I do today.
Yeah. What an amazing journey as well to sort of, as you say, see from both sides. So we're here to talk about financial health. I'm wondering what that means to you. When we say financial health, what does that mean?
I think whenever we talk about money and finances, it can be quite scary and taboo in terms of a topic. And the term financial health isn't one that we're used to. And the way I kind of liken this is, most people are very acutely aware of staying healthy from a physical fitness point of view, right? You want to be in the best shape that you can. You want to be healthy. And in fact, our health is probably the most important commodity that we actually have, the asset that we have, right? And when we talk about financial health, it ties into so many other areas of our lives, but it flies underneath the radar, so much so that it's almost unnoticeable. And it's this unwritten thing, unspoken thing that we don't ever talk about, but it's there in the background. So for me, financial health is all about just being aware and cognizant of what your financial life actually looks like, and ultimately trying to identify whether you have positive financial habits or negative financial habits, because the idea is you're not always going to get rid of all of your negative financial habits, but you want more positive financial habits in play consistently in order for your financial health to be of benefit to you and not a detriment.
And you mentioned there that money is so taboo as a topic. Why do you think it is that we're so reluctant to discuss money, particularly around, I guess, the workplace and salaries and things like that?
It's actually historical. I was actually speaking to someone around the behavioral finance side to why this is the case. And if you look at the UK versus America, right? Americans seem to be more than happy to talk about money, and actually they can be quite braggadocious about it sometimes, right? They're quite happy to say, I earn this much per year. We're in the UK that we don't. And if you trail it back through history and you think about behavioral finance, a lot of it is back down to the way the country and norms were set up back in the day. So for example, in the UK, if you owned land, your wealth was defined by how much land you actually owned. Now, the UK is a pretty small island, so it goes without saying, the more land you own, the more wealthy you are. So therefore, it becomes something you didn't really have to point out, right? And I think that's translated very much into today. And the fact that we don't actually get taught this in school adds to that as well. It's almost impolite to talk about money in that pound, pence, figures kind of scenario, because it's just not very British to do. But I believe that especially with the way the world has moved on with technology, it is something that we have to open up a conversation about. But how you go about doing that is often the biggest question that a lot of people then ask. Well, how do you actually go about talking about it, P? And I think it depends on the situation that you are, but I wouldn't lead with a money conversation. I would lead with, and this is what I do all the time, I lead with goals and aspirations. Because if you talk about people's goals and aspirations, guess what? It's going to have a monetary element to it. And that often leads into a more positive space, a more positive anchoring when you think about people's goals and aspirations. You know, where do you see yourself in 2 years' time? What do you want to achieve? It might be buying a house, or it might be, I want to go on this holiday. Okay, tell me about that. How much is that going to cost? It's such an easier way into that conversation.
Yeah. That's actually really great advice. Sorry, I don't mean actually as in, oh, wow. But that's really great advice. Certainly turning it around to that positive angle can really open up the conversation. We'll get to tips and tricks and advice in a little bit, but we are very much a mental health and wellbeing community. So I'm wondering, you did touch on it slightly, but how can financial worries, if we're struggling with money, or we think we're going to be struggling with money, how can that impact our health?
Well, it does. I mean, look, I can speak from personal experience here. I was in debt through my late teens all the way up until my mid 30s. So I spent a lot of time in debt, and the kind of debt that I had was the ones that it's soul destroying, and people will be able to relate to this, right? Overdrafts, right? Overdrafts where you get paid, and the minute you get paid, you're still in the negative, or you might be in the positive for a short period of time, but then you're straight back into the negative. Credit cards, for example, where it's like you're constantly looking at that balance and just thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do this? So again, speaking about goals and aspirations, all of us have things that we want to do. All of us have aspirations. For a lot of young people these days, it's all about, how do I get on the property ladder? If you're in this space where the thing that you aspire to, the thing that you're looking to achieve feels as though it's unattainable, and there's a financial element to that, what it basically does, it leads to anxiety, it leads to depression. I mean, look, when I was in debt, I gave a talk for another business about a month ago, and I was talking about the impact that debt had on me. So through my years, I was homeless as well. So that compounded the whole situation of me being in debt, because when you're on the streets, you're in survival mode, essentially. And for me, I had an account that had no money in it. I had a solo card. And if anybody remembers solo cards, you try using that in any of the shops. Like, if they didn't have a solo sticker outside of the shop, you couldn't use your card. But what I did have with the account, for some reason, was a checkbook. And when being on the streets, I was like, okay, I need to eat. I don't have any money. Then I quickly realized, hang on a second, you can go into a shop, you can write a check, they'll let you leave with the stuff, and then they'll try and cash the check, but you still left with the stuff and there's no money in the account, so the bank can deal with it, right? So those kind of things compounded my situation into debt. And for me, the negative impact that it had was I was always constantly anxious. As I got myself on my feet, I was really, really worried. If I got a letter in the post, panic. If I didn't recognize where it was from. If someone rang my phone and it was from a withheld number, or I didn't recognize the number, panic, anxiety, because I was always aware of, I haven't got my finances under control. And that basically means that bailiffs, debt collectors are around the corner for me all the time. And for about 15 years or so, I didn't look at my bank statements, because all the time, I didn't even look at my bank balance, because if I go to the ATM, I know it's minus £2,000 because of my overdraft, right? Never looked at the credit card statements, because it's like, it's minus £3,000 and I don't have enough money to pay this back. And back in the days, you will get fees upon fees upon fees, making it even worse. You bury your head in the sand. And when you do that, you're not fronting up to the problem that you have. And that compounds things even worse. And for me, it was all about anxiety, depression, and trying to do everything but look at the issue. And for a lot of people who struggle with money, that's where they feel. And it's a really horrible place to be. And it's difficult. You need to have a plan. And I always encourage people to take the courage to look at it, because it's not as hard as you think it will be when you start looking at it, but it's still hard and painful.
Yeah, and I have to say, so much of that resonated with me, thinking back to my 20s and 30s of the fear of the letters coming through the letterbox is just crazy. But yeah, thank you. And you know, you were talking earlier about how you were in this situation when you fronted up for that job interview at the Building Society and got the job. So one thing that I'm wondering is, you know, when you're feeling that way about your finances, when you're feeling that anxiety, that depression, that sort of overwhelming just weight on you, how does that then impact how you can show up at work? Like when you do get that job, when you are working, what sort of impact can that have on you there?
I think it's really important, especially for companies who employ people, because there's a lot of conversation around financial well-being in the workplace. And look, it is definitely needed. And thank God we're having these conversations now. But what is the role of work, right? The role of work is for people to go in, be able to do work in exchange for a wage that keeps their livelihood going, right? And with the cost of living crisis currently, what many people are finding is that depending on their what money they have coming in and their outgoings, they're finding that the equation doesn't necessarily match. The pay isn't going far enough because of external factors impacting their spend and what they've got money going out for. And I think in the workplace, for employees specifically, or employers specifically, this talk of financial well-being in the workplace is really, really important, because when you go to work, I mean, if you're worried about financial worries, you're 1.5 times more likely to be looking for a new job. That is simple human psychology, right? You're going into something that you think, I can't make ends meet on this. So you look for something else. And I think it's really, really important for us to have these conversations now around, for many employers, they don't know how to approach this. And when I do programs for people, it's like, we're not experts in money. We don't even know whether we should be touching this conversation, because look, we're the employer. Like, what's our role in guiding people on how to manage their money or what to do with their money? But it is an important one. And when you look at some of the surveys, a lot of employees say that that's actually what they need. They need a little bit of help. They spend most of the time at work. I mean, where do you spend most of your day? At work. Probably more time at work than with your families at the end of the day. So I think it's a shared responsibility. And when you think about it from a corporate point of view, the benefits are actually there. You know, you get better retention in staff, you get better loyalty, you get better productivity by helping people with understanding how can you make your money go a little bit further. And I welcome these conversations because it is very much needed. And I think there is a role to play for employers to provide that little bit of support, particularly in times like this, around, look, we've got an employee benefits package, for example. This is what it includes that could save you money and help your money go a little bit further. Even that, as a very, very basic thing to do, adds a lot of value.
Absolutely. And there, as you say, there are so many of these things already there that maybe businesses aren't talking about, or that employees don't necessarily know. You earlier talked about opening up the conversation by talking about goals and aspirations. I'm wondering if there's anything that you think employers and business leaders can do to help facilitate these open conversations about finance.
Yeah. So look, my most impactful and most rewarding years professionally were between 2012 and 2017. And that's when I found myself in Canary Wharf, because I don't have a university degree. So being in Canary Wharf in itself, just getting a job there was like, okay, I shouldn't be here, but I'm here now. But one thing that company did really, really well, and I acknowledge these guys a lot through whenever I tell my story, two people, a guy called Jonathan Scannell and a guy called Richard Horner. Now, this business had a very unique take on, yes, it was very cutthroat. I mean, it's Canary Wharf. What do you expect, right? But they wanted you to perform at the best of your ability, because they know that if they could get you there, the return for them as a business was huge. And I will never forget this, but Jonathan Scannell and Richard Horner, they took an interest in me. They took an interest in what makes you tick, why you come into this place of work, Pete. And they got behind my goals and aspirations, right? So think about this, right? I was born in 1979. I was fostered 3 months to 8 years old, taken to a country that I didn't even know, stayed there for 10 years, sent back with 50 quid in my pocket in 1998. I've been homeless. I don't have a university degree. I ended up in Canary Wharf in this company that, for me, when I started in financial services, I was like, if I can ever work in Canary Wharf, I've made it, right? It was the pinnacle of my aspirations at that point. They took an interest in my backstory and where I wanted to go from that point of achieving this dream of being in this amazing place that could be a massive stepping stone to me. And the conversations they had in my professional development programs and just one-on-ones with me was, look, where do you want to be? What does your private life, what are your goals and aspirations in the next 1 or 2 years? And one thing that Richard Horner did very, very well, he keyed into the fact that for me, home ownership was a big thing. I'd been homeless. The idea of owning my own home not only was so far removed from my thinking, he made me realize actually it is possible, because I was in an environment where if I worked really, really hard, I could basically earn the money for a deposit to get me there. And I think, again, how do you start conversations about money? You key into people's goals and aspirations. And it could be something as simple as, I just want to be able to have more balance with my family. Okay, well, how do you make that happen within the framework of your work environment in terms of maybe just being a bit more efficient, right? Doing a bit more or having flexible hours, for example. How do you make that happen? And I think that's where you basically start. This isn't a complicated conversation to have. It's an uncomfortable one to have. But if you approach it in the right way, goals and aspirations are what we all have in common. We all have all of that. We all have things that we want to be able to do, that we've all got a bucket list, right? Of things like, if I could do that, that would be amazing, that make life worthwhile. If we start there, that is the biggest win that we can have, because the conversation doesn't then become about being productive, being effective, being a beneficial member of the team. It's okay. Outside of work, you want to do this. How does this get you to that? And it's connecting those dots. And I think that's the biggest role that employers can have in terms of having a conversation to get things going.
Yeah. And that's, then they're not just immediately coming in and saying, right, money, how much do you want to be earning? What do you need? They're talking 100%. About things that, inspire.
And beyond that, I think it's important for employers to also look at it from an employee's point of view. How did that make me feel? I felt like I was the most important person in that business. And I worked as a result of that, because I understood that this isn't just a job now. It's part of my career, but I'm working towards my own life goals, and they are giving me the vehicle for me to achieve my life goals. I didn't feel like a number. And for many people in the workplace, they feel like numbers because there isn't that personal kind of intersection with management where you feel like an integral part of the business, and the business feels an integral part of your own personal journey. And we can speak about HR and what HR need to do there, but that is the fundamental idea that worked wonders for me through what has been the best part of my career so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Jane says in the chat, that brings more joy to your work as well.
100%.
When you feel that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing I did want to ask, one thing that you do yourself is financial literacy and financial education. And I can see Vasili's also asked this question in the chat, saying that when it comes to money, there's a fundamental issue that people are not taught how to deal with it. Do you think that there is anything that business leaders and managers can do to provide access to that sort of financial education for their employees?
There's a lot you can do. I mean, you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of a person's, budget and stuff like that, right? But it is having, especially in times like this, just being aware that people are actually struggling. And like I've already mentioned, if you've got an employee benefits program, for example, that might have, I don't know, travel to work schemes, for example, right? It's trying to have clear communication. So my experience of employee benefits is the language is so clunky that people don't actually know what it means. Right. So being able to break those things down into very simple, easy to understand pieces of information that people can understand, number one, but also draw relevance from. And that's really, really important. So how might you use this, and what is the benefit of actually using it? Sounds very oversimplified, and it is, but we need to think about where are people and meeting people where they're at in the reality in which they live. And you're not going to be able to tailor that specifically to every single employer. But when you look at the situation, you should find that there is an overarching theme that you can plug into to make it relevant.
Absolutely. One really important question that Tom's just raised in the chat as well is, what area of the business should lead this conversation? Is it leadership, line managers, HR? Who should be having this conversation?
In my experience, if you're going to do anything from a company point of view, it has to come from the leadership. Because otherwise, how do you get it embedded, and how do you get it sustainable and actually entrenched in the culture of the business? And this is the challenge that we have at the moment in the, financial well-being at work, right? Leadership have to buy into it. I see a lot of HR departments trying to push it, but then sometimes it doesn't get signed off because leadership don't necessarily see the benefit of it. Ideally, it needs to come from leadership, but at times you need advocates and people to push it from HR, from managers, and so on and so forth. So there needs to be a chain of communication and a chain of agreement, but for effective long-term benefit, it should really come from leadership, and you need to get leadership to really buy into it, because you want it entrenched in the company's culture, not just this program that we're doing. Why are we doing it? We're doing it because we want to help you. Why? What are those key messages? What are the key themes? Because ultimately, if you're trying to build a program, the goal and how much it's bought into by leadership and how it plugs into the company culture will essentially determine and dictate how the employees interact with the program itself. So you need it really from leadership in order for it to be embedded and for it to come into that culture and be disseminated in the right way.
Yeah. And that's certainly something we've seen with the mental health programs as well, as it really needs to come from that leadership side of things.
Yeah. And just on the mental health side of things, I mean, look, over the last, I would probably say 6 or 7 years, mental health has been a big thing, right? And even physical health, right? You have employee benefits programs that have gym memberships, all that kind of stuff plugged in. And whilst that is great to see, if you think about well-being, one of the biggest factors that impacts your well-being, yes, even mental health, is the financial side. And that for the longest time has gone under the radar. It's been completely missed. You have employee assistance programs, okay, which is fantastic. But if the issue is derived from the fact that actually, you know what, you've got a handful of employees who are just worried about making ends meet, and they can't, the energy bills have gone up so much that they're trying to look for second and third jobs. Where's the intervention for that? Because you can have someone on an employee assistance program, talking about the depression and the anxiety they might feel, but that person isn't necessarily qualified to actually give them the guidance they need on the financial side, or maybe streamlining, reworking debts, for example, to alleviate the pressure and therefore make the mental health side of things a lot more manageable. So I think there has been this period where we've missed the connection between mental health and finances, and they're very, very closely aligned. And if anyone's running a program where they have, this focus on mental health, that's great, but we need to think about the financial impact as well.
Yeah. So in that case, do you think, all these businesses that are now developing mental health programs, wellness programs, do you think that they should be very much embedding financial wellness in that strategy as well?
100%. And I think that the payoff will be so much greater, and it will be more effective as an overall program if you do. I don't know anybody apart from the ultra wealthy right now who are not impacted by the cost of living crisis, who are not worried about energy prices going up, who are not worried about their mortgages increasing in their payments, right? And then you've got food costs, fuel costs in conjunction with all of that. I don't know anyone who isn't worried about. I ran a poll on my YouTube channel last week. 75% of people said they're worried. 75% of people. It's an overwhelming majority. So especially in times like this, you need to have something. You need to have something on the financial side.
Awesome. I know that there's been some questions coming in while we've been talking. So let's start moving to them. If you do have a question for Peter about financial wellness, whether it's something that your business can do or something that you can do yourself, please do ask them. But I actually just wanted to start with Vasily's asked a couple of questions. So we've looked at the one about being taught to deal with money, but before that he asked what companies can do to help their employees who might be struggling, and how they could encourage employees who struggle to speak up. Is there anything that you think they can be doing?
Right. So I think there is a lot about environment here and how the culture of your business is set up. So you're never going to get anybody talk openly about their financial troubles if they don't feel comfortable in doing so. So it's all about creating a safe space first and foremost. And look, some businesses may not necessarily be able to run financial well-being programs or workshops, for example. So I've been doing a lot of workshops for businesses over the last couple of months or so, where I talk about my story and maybe then give some real practical tools and things that people can do, and actually do Q&A sessions where I can say, look, if we take questions, these are scenarios, these things that you can actually do. Not all companies are going to be able to do that. But what you can do is, try and reach out to nonprofits that are working in the space. Turn to us as a prime example of one, right? If your employees are struggling to make ends meet and they're feeling the pressure of the cost of living crisis, and I would imagine some of them are, having a connection with a charity like that can help, because it's another point of, look, if you're struggling, by the way, there might be some support here. But it is about trying to, as an employer, take that first step in letting people know that you are around to have a conversation if you need to. A lot of employers, in my experience, are a little bit worried about, okay, so what happens if we get questions back? The HR team aren't necessarily trained on finances. They may not necessarily know the stuff themselves. So where's our go-to? I think it's just important, Citizens Advice Bureau, for example, Step Change, for example, is another one. Being able to signpost people if you're not in a position where you can have your own financial well-being workshop specifically.
That, really, again, not trying to constantly make the links between mental health and financial well-being, but there are now mental health first aiders out there who are essentially signposters. It sounds like maybe having a financial first aider might even be something that businesses could consider. Yeah. Something that I did just want to pick up on in when people were introducing themselves in the room, we did have someone who was talking about questions around changing jobs, maybe even retiring during this cost of living crisis. And there will be a lot of people out there reaching retirement age and wondering what they do now. Is there anything that any sort of advice that you would give to people of that sort of life change area around protecting financial health in this time?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're at that stage at the minute where retirement, you're at that point where you're getting to that retirement date, it's really, really important to understand whether your retirement provisions are going to be okay and are fit to endure a possible recession. I mean, we're already in recession at the moment, but they're forecasting that the recession is going to last 4 consecutive quarters. So that's until the end of 2024 at the very, very least. This is where I'm probably going to say stuff that maybe people won't necessarily agree with. And financial advisors get a bad rap for good reasons as well, but there are also some very, very good ones. But there is value in this. The first priority when you're looking to retire is, and the question you'll be asking yourself is, do I have enough to retire? And in recessionary periods where the markets are falling, your pension pot is probably invested in something that might be suffering right now. So speaking to a financial advisor to cash flow your retirement plans based on a number of scenarios and outcomes. So if the market were to fall 20%, are you going to be okay? That can add a little bit of comfort in you understanding whether or not you have enough in your pot to actually be able to sustain it. And also, it might also just bring up other things that you could do as well to kind of cushion yourself, protect yourself, and to pretty much get yourself in a position where you feel confident about the decision you're going to make to retire. Let's make no mistake, in 2007, 2008, there were a lot of people who lost a lot of money in their pensions. And, when I was advising and working with financial advisors, it was horrible to have conversations with people to say, look, this pension that you've worked all your life for, you're going to have to reduce your income. because the markets have fallen X amount. So if you continue to take an income, you might run out of money. Those are horrible conversations to have. And what you want to do ideally is you want to get ahead of those kind of problems by having conversations early around, are you there? Are you prepared enough for those kind of things? And through cash flow modeling, understanding what the scenarios might be if the market was to fall quite significantly. Would you have to reduce your income? In some cases, I've had conversations with people where you've said you can't take income, period. Very, very difficult conversations. So speak to professionals is what I'm trying to say here. It's really, really important. Don't try and, just guess it on your own. You didn't work all this time to be guessing it and possibly getting it wrong. So speak to a professional.
And where would people find those professionals? Is it something their banks would provide, or,
You can go with your banks. I mean, there is a website called Unbiased. Go to Unbiased, and that you can pop in your details there, and it can give you access to a financial advisor near you. A lot of financial advisors don't charge you for the first meeting. It's completely free, but Unbiased will help. Unbiased.co.uk.
Awesome. Thank you. Tom, you've got a question. I'm wondering, I'm just going to let you unmute yourself. Tom, would you like to ask your question yourself? Or I can ask on your behalf. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
That's better.
All right. There we go.
That's the sound of a man scrabbling around.
No worries. I just thought you've got quite a long question there, so I thought it might be better to hear it in your own words.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that you spoke about employee assistance programs. Some of the good ones should have a layer where financial well-being is available through that. So you can sometimes, depending on the provider, connect into financial health stuff through the employee assistance. So don't write it off just yet, but they don't all do that by any stretch. Most of them absolutely concentrate on physical and mental health. But my question, Peter, is how do we get through to the harder to reach parts of an organization? If I'm working on a production line, if I'm a night shift worker in a warehouse, if I'm on a construction site, because let's face it, you might be proportionally more affected if you're lower paid. And we know that mental health shows up a lot more in those categories as well. So how do we get through? What can we do? Has anybody else got any ideas about, just reaching the hard to reach parts with this uncomfy subject?
That's a really good question, Tom. I did some work with a company like a couple of months ago, and but the shape of their business was very, very different. So a lot of the people that they had in their business that they were targeting were on the low end of the income. So they were aware that they would be struggling. And I think when you're in an industry where you might have a smaller proportion of those people, it can be hard. I think it's all down to, again, the leadership and the company. And if you are listening to how employees feel across all of the bands and being aware of, okay, people are affected differently. I mean, we can talk about the top end. I mean, the top end are impacted, but they're impacted in very, very different ways to the lower end. And I think it's all about, as a leadership team, looking at your employee base across all of the brackets and knowing when to pay attention to certain segments of your employees, I should say, given what's going on at the time. Internally, the question is going to be, do you run kind of, employee satisfaction surveys? Do you have your ear to the ground for that kind of stuff? Do people actually feel comfortable talking about that kind, saying this is how I'm feeling right now? And I think really that's maybe the first place to start, and maybe just surveying people and just saying, look, we know that this is going on right now. How are you feeling? How are you impacted? And trying to get a gauge of where people feel that way. And hopefully they're in that environment where they'll happily give an honest answer.
Does that help, Tom? I'm going to say yes. He's gone off mute. He's gone back on mute. Awesome. Thank you so much. And as you say, those people are super hard to reach sometimes, the shift workers, the people out on the road rather than in an office. So thank you for sharing those thoughts, Peter. No worries, Tom. Susie, you're asking a question. I'm wondering, would you like to ask that yourself as well? This could be dangerous, me getting people on the mic, making sure that they can unmute themselves. Okay, you should be able to ask it yourself if you wanted to, Susie.
Hi.
Hello.
Hiya.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for giving me this chance. Because I was just wondering, because thanks for sharing all your experience on the company perspective, but I'm also very interested in, have you ever had a chance to explore the relationship between money and mental health on self-employed people, or let's say like small business owner? Because I found that's also a very big market when we talk about money and mental health. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good question, Susie. I mean, I'm self-employed. I'm a business owner, right? And it's funny when you look at it from a self-employed point of view. You're running under your own steam, and the issue that self-employed people have is you don't have employee benefits necessarily if you're running your own thing. A lot of people are focused on growing their business or just ticking over in their business, and not necessarily have the provisions of auto enrollment, for example, where you have 3% going into a pension fund your employer. A lot of people don't already have that set up. They're running under their own steam. They're running their own business, and it's just a scramble to make things meet at the end of the month, let alone grow. And so in my experience, when I speak to self-employed people or business owners, they feel the pressure a lot more because they're having to deal with the day-to-day running of their business. And that's what consumes them majority of the time. They're not necessarily thinking about pension contribution. They're not necessarily thinking about employee benefits programs or anything like that. They're just focusing on, I need to make the business work this month. I need to chase down this bit of business. And that has a more acute effect, I found, from speaking to people on them, especially in times like this where they're struggling. And I know a few of my friends who are still business owners, we speak regularly, where I try and give, tips and advice to, but they feel it way more acutely than someone who's maybe employed in a business with the security of a monthly income.
Does that help, Susie? Oh, you're muted again. You should be able to. But yeah, I agree. I'm also self-employed, and I do not at all. This is why I've been joking constantly about this being very nerve-wracking for me having this conversation. I don't think about my own financial well-being at all, so I'm being shamed here. I need to go off and think about it.
But on that note, though, I mean, I think it is natural as a business owner to feel that way. And this is where I start talking about. So when I coach people, essentially, what I try to say to people is, we need to compartmentalize this. And I've had to do this myself as a business owner. So if you're an employed role, you would know that your work pays for your personal life. For a lot of self-employed people, there isn't that distinction. There isn't that separation. Your work is your life, right? But it isn't treated as though, right, this business, this self-employed role, this thing that I'm building here needs to fund this. Separating it out and having expectations on that side simplifies personal finance. Because what that will essentially do is, I had a coaching call with a client 6 months ago. He ran his own business, but he funded all of his personal costs from his business. And I was like, okay, but he wasn't running payroll. And I'm like, hang on a second, stop right there. Because when you separate the two, it then asks you to put things like payroll in place. And then you start viewing it as a business and not melded with your personal life. But there has to be an active and proactive look at that to be able to set up that distinction. And the earlier you're able to do that, the better it is. But it can be really, really hard depending on the type of business that you're running, what sector you're running, and generally just the shape of your business as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And more of us are self-employed these days or running small businesses. So this is such an important conversation too. April and Sarah, you've got a question. Would you like to ask that one yourself?
Okay, sure. This is April. Yes, so I guess I'm asking a question on behalf of, I think, a lot of people, which is, if you have very little disposable income, what is the best financial decision you can make? Or looking back on your own past, early on in your journey, when you had little disposable income, what was the best financial decision you made?
Okay, so that's quite loaded. So let's just go back a little bit. So I always talk about controlling the controllables, okay? And that's particularly pertinent right now. So if you have little disposable income, I think it's important to go back to basics and just step back and look at things from a macro point of view, right? Really step back, micro out. Because I think all of us will be guilty of this, and I've certainly been guilty of it in the past. There'll be things that we spend money on that we don't necessarily need. And as technology has moved forward, so I'll give you a prime example. Direct debits are phasing out, where you'd have a direct debit and you can see it on your monthly statement, you can just cancel it. That's being phased out by a lot of companies now. A lot of companies have reverted to payments on your card, which isn't a direct debit that you can just cancel. You actually have to contact them to cancel that payment. And so talking about controlling what you can control, the controllables, it's really taking a big macro view of your finances and looking, right, this is what I've got coming in, this is what going out. And in circumstances where we find ourselves right now with a cost of living crisis, really looking at, okay, are there things that I'm paying for that I could maybe do without that I don't necessarily need, to try and increase that disposable income buffer? And that's really, really important, particularly now, because, you know, if we look at April, they're saying the forecast for energy prices is going to rise by another 74%. We need to be proactive. A lot of people, and this is, again, I've done this, so it's not, you know, shaming people in any particular way, but it's what we're built to do on autopilot. We think about finances in a reactive fashion as opposed to proactive. We think about things when they're due, in opposed to thinking about, okay, that might be coming down the track, so I need to prepare now for it. And just sitting down and taking a real macro view of, right, where's my money going? And am I spending money on things that I don't need it? I'm not really using it. A gym is a prime example, right? If the gym is seeing your bank balance more than it's seeing you, it's got to go. But a lot of people have a gym membership because they feel good about, okay, I might go next week, but they don't go. And again, I've done that as well. So it's being really, I guess, pragmatic and being really honest with yourselves to try and increase that disposable income buffer, because you're likely going to need it moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Again, my gym membership got cancelled because I hadn't been there in years. And I was like,
They're expensive now as well. They're really
They
expensive.
are.
50 quid, 60 quid, 70 quid a month. It's mad.
Oh, I thought I would treat myself to a David Lloyd membership because it had a swimming pool and it was a lot more than that, and I was never going. Cool. Do we have any final questions for Pete? And while I let those come in, I'll just ask, you've mentioned a few times there your own coaching business. So it would be remiss of me not to invite you to explain a little bit about how you personally can support people on the call if they wanted to.
Yeah, so I mean, I do one-on-one coaching. It's a little bit difficult for me to do because of the volume. But for people who need specific help on structuring their finances and looking at things properly, I do one-on-one coaching here and there. I'm going to have to scale that back because I'm about to sign a book deal to do a book early next year. So through the next few months, we'll be scaling back. But I think for people who maybe want to have conversations with me, I run regular live Q&A sessions on YouTube and on Instagram. If you attend one of those or you ping me a message beforehand, that's where I can really kind of give, you know, some detailed answers around certain situations that you might be facing. I find that a lot of people feel very confused about what to do based on their circumstances, where there are so many variables. And I'm lucky enough that I've worked across retail banking, corporate banking, and wealth management. So my knowledge is quite broad in terms of the actual experience that I have, that I can give you some real pointers that will be practical. And that's the most important bit. A lot of people talk about, oh, just do this, but how do you do it? Right? That's really where it's at. And I pride myself in giving practical guidance, right? This is what you need to think about. These are the options. These are the pros and cons. So we can do that in private coaching. But if we do it on a Q&A as well, I do give a lot of detail. I scribe on a iPad and give examples and diagrams and all that kind of stuff, just to really help people with their understanding and being able to whittle down their choices and options.
Awesome. And we'll make sure we share your YouTube, your Instagram, your website, all of your links. We'll share that in the community and in the follow-ups to this as well. And awesome. So if there's no more questions, maybe if we start to wrap it up there, we're coming to the end anyway. Thank you very much for your questions, and thank you, Peter, for answering them and being so generous with your thoughts. This is such an important topic, but we do need to wrap up the official Q&A there. We do encourage you to make use of our virtual community, though, to keep this conversation going. It is a private space where you can connect with like-minded individuals, people in this chat right now, and we do have several groups set up to enable focused conversation, sharing resources, asking questions to your peers, all sorts of things. We've only been open a few months, but we've already held a plethora of events and conversations to help you build more mentally healthy workplaces, and you'll also find recordings of these over in the community library. And a recording of this one, if you want to listen back to hear Peter's thoughts again, we will have that recording up. But that is a wrap. Thank you all for joining us today. Peter, is there anything you'd like to say as a final thought, a final parting thought to the people here?
I think the final thing would be, and I've encountered this a lot over the last 6 months or so. If you're struggling, ask for help. There seems to be this weird thing where people feel shame about asking for help. And I've had this a lot. I was speaking to someone like last month, and it was like, I've got a question, it's for my mate. And I was like, okay, but when you start explaining the question, it's like, actually, it's for you. And he said, actually, it is for me, but I'm just really embarrassed. And I said, why? And he goes, well, I'm an adult now, I should know better. And I'm like, okay, but at what point were you taught about any of this stuff for you to be able to make an informed decision? And the answer was never. And that's going to be true for many of us, right? A lot of the time we make financial decisions reactively because life takes over, and that's natural. We make that decision about a credit card or taking on XYZ at the point where we need it the most. And oftentimes that isn't the best environment to make an informed decision, especially when you might have time pressures or there's other pressures around you. And so if you've made a mistake and you find yourself in a situation that isn't preferable, that you are struggling with, there is no shame. You should never feel any shame. And I actually say that acknowledging that you need help and asking for help is actually a sign of courage, maturity, and strength. And there are lots and lots of places that you can go to ask for help. So if you are struggling, ask for help, speak to people, try and have a conversation. No one's going to judge you. Trust me, it's all in your head. And when you start having that conversation, it's like the weight has been lifted off you. It's like, why didn't I do this sooner? And that would be the last word, I guess, for me.
Awesome. And of course, keep an eye out for a book coming in the not too distant future by the sounds of it. So Indeed. Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter, for your time. Thank you all of you for joining us today.
Cheers.
And yeah, have a great rest of the day, everybody.